What's up, y'all? I am not going to waste any of your time. We're going to get right into it off the rip. This is the Ice Shards build that I've been running for 1.0.3 after we pushed the patch out, which did pretty much nothing for sorcerers, but that's okay because we are finding alternative ways to play and make do with what we're given. I'm going to jump right into the skill tree. We're going to do Paragon. We're going to do all the gear, including all the legendary aspects. We're going to do some build variation. But if you don't want any of that and you just want to see the build, check the link in the description down below. I will have put a link down there for everything that you need. If you don't want to listen to me talk, which is totally fine. And if you do, cool. So let's start with build. Right off the rip, all the way to the top, obviously you're going to wait until you have enough points to do these kind of swaps, that kind of thing, because this is a pretty gear-dependent build. Obviously, we're not using Firebolt spell itself, but we do need it for an enchantment. So that takes 2 points off the rip to get us down to our core skills. 5 out of 5 in Ice Shards. We're taking Enhanced Ice Shards and Destructive to get Vulnerable out as much as possible. As we've seen, I've discussed it on stream. You've probably seen it in other people's YouTube videos. But Vulnerable damage is like one of the biggest pools of damage you can pull from. It's one of the best stats to have on literally any piece of gear. And as so long as you're keeping it up basically all the time, you're going to shred people. So super, super important. Obviously, we're taking Enhanced just because you always do. Right below that, 1 point in Devastation for that little 3 max mana, but that's so that we can get Elemental Dominance. Core skills deal 9% increased damage when cast above 50 mana, which is going to play off Ice Shards 100% of the time. Down here, we are taking only 1 point in Flame Shield with no additional. This is literally just for the immunity, which will get you out of CCs. 1 point into Teleport. I've got 6 from gear. So obviously, we can bounce around the map and get out of stuff as fast as possible. Plus, cooldown increased by 0.5 seconds per enemy hit when you teleport into a group. It's getting your cooldowns back as often as you can, which is super important. 3 out of 3 for Elemental Attunement. We want this to happen as often as possible. Our crit rating is going to be through the roof. We'll talk about why. So we're getting defensive cooldowns back every 10 seconds pretty routinely from this, which is wonderful. Only 4 out of 3 on Glass Cannon. I kind of wish this was as high as 6 out of 3, but I don't have enough points from gear just yet. But maybe in the future we can get this one pushed up. But maxing Glass Cannon, super important. Ice Armor, which we're going to have up all the time for both the regen from Enhanced Ice Armor, as well as just having a barrier, which a ton of our stuff will play off of on top of that. Barrier is like the #1 go-to defensive thing for sorcerers right now because resistance doesn't really work, and we don't get a whole lot of armor from other sources, which is tragic. And then pushing Frost Nova as high as we possibly can, within reason. I'm not even maxed on skill point contribution. I'm only at 4 out of 5, technically, because I'm getting 7 from gear. But this is to push the cooldown as low as you possibly can. You want to be Frost Novaing every single chance you can. That makes things vulnerable. They're also frozen. You can double dip in a bunch of different stuff from that. Huge. Enhanced Frost Nova, and of course, Mystical as well. Makes them vulnerable for 4 seconds or 6 against bosses. Huge. Moving down here to Conjuration, we're not really taking any of the skills. We are taking as much Lucky Hit as we can. We are taking 1 and Align the Elements so we can get the biggest barriers we possibly can from popping cooldowns. Since we're going to be resetting those as often as possible, that's going to be massive. That's like our main defensive thing, and it's an offensive ability because you're getting increased Lucky Hit when you have barrier, that kind of thing from the gear that you're wearing. Down here into Mastery, 1 out of 3 because just the barrier increased duration is fine, but we are more looking at Lucky Hit. Frost skills have a chance to freeze, and we will be spamming cold skills, frost skills basically constantly with Ice Shards because the entire idea is you're turning yourself into a human turret, and you'll see that during gameplay super obviously. Blizzard for the chill edition, so you're getting a little bit of additional damage off of that, which is pretty big. 1 out of 3 right here for Inner Flames, and then a big piece of the damage for this build is right here, the Devouring Blaze. And you'll see here, 60% increased critical strike damage against burning enemies is super cool, but if they're immobilized, the bonus is 150. Now you might be thinking, you don't have immobilized in your build, Loop. How are you getting that? We'll talk about the gloves here in a second, because that kind of is what has made this build what it is so far. I'm enjoying it a lot. Anyway, continuing down here, Ultimate, you're taking everything. Permafrost, Hoarfrost, Frigid Breeze, and Icy Touch. We want to gas all of the cold skills, synergy as high as we can. 1 out of 3 right here because killing a burning enemy increases your mana regen. Turns out, because remember all the way up here we took Frostbolt, we're going to enchant that, so every frost skill also is going to make things burn. So everything that dies gives you mana regen back, which is awesome. 1 out of 3 icy veil. Wait, no, down here. I backed up. That's silly. And then last but not least, of course, Avalanche. Your frost skills, 10% chance to make your next cast of Ice Shards or Blizzard do more damage and cost no mana. That's huge. Plus doubled against vulnerable targets, which is going to be pretty much constantly. So that's the entire skill tree setup. We'll do Paragon in a second, but I want to talk about gear first because some of those pieces in there kind of play off of some of the skill points we have, play off of the gear that we have on, specifically Fists of Fate. We'll get to that one here in a second. Don't see this, I think, too much in a build right now, but I do very much enjoy how it is working with the current setup. Start at the top, though. Frost Blitz gives you multiple Frost Nova cooldowns or charges. The synergy between having multiple charges of Frost Nova, coincidentally working very, very well when mixed with Elemental Attunement. Even if you've spent just one charge, you can get Frost Nova back as a defensive cooldown from Elemental Attunement, which is awesome. So you will find that you will constantly have Frost Novas up, and I love the way that plays off each other. Obviously on the helmet, lucky hit chance when you have barrier, cooldown reduction, total armor is very good, life on kill. There could be a better role on this, potentially. I'm not exactly sure what I would want changed. Obviously besides the cooldown reduction increase. But that's a big one, along with lucky hit when you have a barrier, because we're going to have barrier up as often as possible. Next chest piece, Raiment of the Infinite. I think that doesn't even need to truly be explained because everybody runs Raiment. If you're a sorcerer, it is just so freaking good. Pulling mobs together up to a 3-second stun. Massive. Love that. And the cooldown increase doesn't really end up being a big deal because we have so much CDR everywhere else, along with the synergy with all those defensive skills giving you cooldowns back. Doesn't really matter. Fists of Fate. Obviously with the helmet, you have lucky hit when barrier is up, plus life regen, plus primary resource coming back, plus there's your immobilize. The 18.8% chance to immobilize could be up to 24, which would be huge if I ever get another roll of these, which I don't think I have. I think I've only ever gotten one, which is too bad. A chance to daze. More CC is always good. Combined with your attacks randomly deal 1 to 260% of the normal damage up to 300. The roll on this right now, not great. Could be phenomenal. And I think the synergy with the Fists of Fate really can't be overstated because the Immobilize giving so much more critical hit damage because of how often you're going to be critting because of some of the other aspects. Massive. You'll see some pretty big numbers if you get higher on the 260% or up to 300% scale. We have a couple different things, and I'm going to talk about the pants in this build specifically at the end. We'll save that for a second here. Why I have 3 sets of pants down here. I'll explain it a little bit, and I'll explain why I have a main hand and off hand down there too, because you might be wondering why a two-hander. Before that we get to that, Shared Misery I felt like is pretty big. These are very good boots. I might wish for ones without the dodge chance and instead maybe have Flame Shield ranks, but max ranks of Frost Nova, massive. Additional evade charges is wonderful. The mana cost reduction, wonderful, because Ice Shards you're spamming a lot, so you're trying to reduce the amount of mana you spend, as well as increase your total mana cap constantly. That's huge for making this build work. That might be the most important thing, actually. And then Shared Misery to spread the CC around, because we're trying to lucky hit as often as possible, and we're going to be spamming a lot of Frost Shards, so you're going to see lucky hits come up quite a bit, even with the base lucky hit chance of Ice Shards being only 21%. We have a two-hander in here, and the reason we're running two-hander is because the reduced attack speed combined with the increased damage values just from having a two-hander makes you spend mana a little slower, and it makes you hit a lot harder on single targets. Crit strike damage, massive. Damage to burning enemies, that'll be everything. All stats actually ends up being real big on the staff. 84 all stat helps with Paragon, just a colossal amount, and I'll show you that in a second here. And of course, the best damage stat in the game, vulnerable. You want that pretty much everywhere. And then we slap control on this because if you look, you deal 66% more damage to immobilize, which we're getting from gloves, and frozen enemies, which we're getting constantly from everything else. Plus, if you're lucky, you can sprinkle a little stun in there from potential other skills if you have it on another stat, or maybe you make variants to your build to include some stun. There's a chance for it to be there, but those two alone, that double dip in control, big. Plus, we're looking for vulnerability all the time, so crit strike damage to vulnerable enemies goes a long way. We're like constantly making things vulnerable. Up here to the neck, we have put Elementalists on there, and this is a big reason why the crit chance and lucky hit crit skills are so good, is because Elementalists on a neck gives that 50% stat increase for the aspect. So you see we're at 57% increased critical strike chance, and based on the rest of our gear, if we look over here, 22 plus the 57, 3/4 of the time or more, we are critting. That is a ton. We're going to be putting out crits like you would not believe. Combined with just how good this neck is, all defensive skills, flat damage, mana cost reduction, and 3 ranks of Devouring Blaze make this a god roll neck that I probably won't ever replace. The mana cost reduction going up is literally the only stat that I don't have maxed. It's massive. This thing is nuts. So that neck goes a really, really long way. Next, we have Piercing Cold, which is like the quintessential Ice Shards build aspect. Obviously, crit damage is vulnerable, more lucky hit chance, more damage to burning enemies. Love that. If we're dipping into damage 2 stats, as well as crit and vulnerable all in one piece, the synergy there, the multiplicative nature of damage buckets. And if you don't know what that is, you can do a little looking around how damage buckets work. Maybe I'll make a second video about that if you guys are interested. I think at this point it's probably a pretty well explained across the internet kind of idea, but I can, if that's something you want to see, I can explain that to you. And then Prodigies, using a cooldown, which we should be doing constantly, gives us mana back. More crit strike chance, more damage, more vulnerable damage, and in this case, max mana, which I could see being good, being rolled away to something else because of how much other mana, how many other mana sources we have. I believe right now I'm sitting at 160 max mana, which is a ton. You have to, if you look at that too, 160, and then you reference back to Elementalist, which requires you to be at or above 100 mana. We come into play with Elementalists way more than normal, which is why you want to keep your mana up as much as you can. But Prodigies is there to kind of help out with that. Now, you might be thinking, why a two-hander? Like I said, we kind of talked about that. I do have a main and offhand combo with Edge Masters and Control still in there. You're not getting as much control damage boost, though, from having it on a one-hander because it's doubled on a two-hander. That goes a really, really long way. Plus, the slower attack speed for conserving mana ends up being very, very good. So if you wanted to do a main hand offhand, you could, but you're going to have to look for mana cost reduction on the offhand, as much of that as you can to try and build that kind of synergy up so you're keeping your mana high, because you will attack so fast with a main hand offhand combo, you might find yourself out of mana a lot more often. Now, last but not least, the pants. I have an insane set of pants here. The Ranks of Blizzard could be swapped out for a different damage reduction stat. And the DR, just flat DR on it, is actually a really bad roll, which is too bad. It's minimum 4.6. So I'm missing about 6.1% damage reduction just flat from that. But just enemies, that's fine. That makes me very happy to see, actually, because corpse bows are literally the devil. Those things will one-shot you from off the screen, especially if you're a sorcerer. You should be used to getting one-tapped. Damage reduction from enemies that are burning, which will be everything that we hit. And then just flat damage reduction combined with the best defensive aspect in the game, Disobedience. You'll see that everywhere. Now, a couple things to note. Always skulls in your jewelry for armor. Armor is the stat that we're missing, I think, the most. For damage mitigation, it goes the longest way right now because resistances are bad. I explained the emeralds and the main hand, or if main hand offhand combo if you run a two-hand or a one-hand or whatever. But let's talk about the red gems. Max life actually might not be the best call at this point. Looking through the way that this build works off of itself, I'm already at 10,000 HP. The alternative to this, if you're interested in trying something other than rubies, is one of two things. Either Topaz, which for hardcore characters, damage reduction while control impaired is massive. That's huge, and I might actually consider swapping this out because control impairing effects do happen quite often. You might get slowed, you might get frozen, you might get stunned. Whatever it happens to be, feared. Those things, especially in hardcore, are going to nuke you. So if you are looking for as much survivability in tense moments as possible, this could be a very good alternative to rubies. I would probably recommend looking here first. I might swap mine out here in a little bit. The other one is barrier generation with diamonds. Because we're going to be working off of barrier for defensive and offensive bonuses a whole ton in this, this one could go a really long way. Now, diamonds, on top of all of that, combined with potentially Temerity, and let me explain why before you yell at me. I've kind of been dabbling with Temerity as an alternative. because back in the stat tree or the skill tree, if we drop a couple points away, I'm going to float over the one that is of great interest, is warmth. Everything around us is going to be burning, which means you get HP back based on the number of burning enemies nearby, increased relative to whether or not you're next to a boss. Because Temerity exists in the way that it does, giving barrier past max HP based on your healing, with warmth, you will find that you have a barrier up pretty much 24/7, so long as you're getting involved in fights. That being said, once you push into higher nightmare dungeons and the chance of being one-shot and how much damage output they have goes up and up and up, it becomes less viable. I'm hoping in the future Temerity gets some sort of buff, rework, something that makes the barrier more effective, because I think I've seen people talking about there being a bug with barrier generation relative to uniques, Temerity being the one that is referenced a lot. And it kind of is disappointing. I was hoping for a way to mitigate having to go just max DR pants. It's just not as interesting to me as having a unique that does something fun. But until that is rectified, it is probably left for lower or leveling with this build, or maybe if you're grinding nightmares trying to push a level 100, Temerity would be a lot of fun. It's effective and works well at like a level 50 nightmare and lower right now. I can run around, basically feel like I'm invulnerable the entire time. It's a really good piece. It just doesn't have the damage reduction that you need against like boss fights, that kind of thing, which is too bad. The other option for mob control is the Ice Heart ones. These pants are real interesting because every time you kill a frozen target, there is up to a 20% chance that it novas again and makes everything around it continue to be vulnerable. The freeze duration is increased. Damage to injured enemies is huge. Plus damage to frozen enemies and just flat intelligence goes a really long way. But that unique power from these pants is so cool to see implemented in a fight that if you don't have God tier DR pants, then you can roll either one of these uniques and have a way to be effective, to last a while in fights, to not get absolutely smushed when you're battling through lower to mid-tier nightmare dungeons. Now that, like I said, into late game probably won't be as effective, but it just kind of is what it is. Hopefully we get a survivability buff or just some sort of rework for sorcerers. We could talk about that, the main problems with sorcerers right now and how we only have 2 enchantment slots, how a lot of our unique powers or aspects in general have some sort of trade-off where you're always giving something up for a bonus. Example is cooldowns increase and all that kind of thing. Either way, I would love to see Blizzard take Sorcerer off a leash and just let him go. I'd rather see them go too high and then have to get scaled down and be too low and just feel neutered a lot. Not to be dire about the state of sorcerers right now, but kind of every other class is doing a lot better than we are in Nightmare Dungeon pushing as an average. I mean, obviously there's people that are doing 100s and have beat Uber Lilith and stuff like that, which that remains to be seen. Regardless, the last piece of the puzzle here is Paragon, and I will say that with this Paragon setup right now, I think I can do some reworks. I think I can move things around to get a couple more points into things that I enjoy. But we'll talk through all of it, and you can make changes based on what you see fit. I'll try and keep this updated in the video description as I make adjustments as time goes on. This is kind of where I've settled for now. So pretty standard start. You're going up to Elementalist Rare node to push along the way up on the right side. We're throwing Elementalist right here for the non-physical damage. A little bit of resist all, but more importantly in this case, you're dealing fire and cold, which means you're getting those bonus damage percents additive as you run around. You're just basically doing flat damage to things, which is great. We're getting to increase the resist all, as well as filling the willpower out in Erudite, plus elemental balance. We're getting the additional 17.5% non-physical damage from having Dex. Cool. Continue going up. We're picking up Swift Conjure and the attack speed nodes around within Elemental Summoner. And we're going up and putting Exploit. Exploit, everybody loves Exploit, dude. Vulnerable damage, wonderful. No downside to that. We're going to grab, we're kind of grabbing this not for the Conjuration skill, but for the Dex and the vulnerable damage, because Exploit works off of Dexterity. So we're picking up a couple points there. Running over to the left and grabbing more max mana, which is huge for this build. You're going to need those. And then on the right side, non-physical, and more non-physical. Which, of course, as a sorcerer, we only do non-physical. Real quick, we're going to dip over to the right side, and we're going to throw Static Surge on your Paragon board. We're going to run down. We're going to grab more max mana, just because more max mana is always good. You have to pick up a couple stun damage node. No big deal. We're also grabbing the Intelligence damage to burning enemies, and we're pushing up Flame Feeder on the right side. The int here is only really picked up just because we like int. These are some of the points where I'm not 100% sure if this is where I'm going to settle with them. Obviously, the dexterity is good, but I don't really need... you don't really need the stun damage, and I'm happy with having Flame Feeder in here because it's just damage to burning enemies, which will be literally everything. That's why that one was important, but there's some changes over here that I might implement. I'll keep you updated. I'll update the video if that is the case, but for now, I think it's okay where it is. Next, we go up off of the Elemental Summoner board, and we're going to put Burning Instinct in here. Because the center of this one, damage to elites, damage to burning enemies, and elites, seems like a no-brainer to me. You're getting the bonus because of willpower. We love that. On the bottom down here, damage reduction from burning enemies, which is everything that we hit. Damage to burn. We see it's just a lot of burning. Everything's going to be burning. Why would you not grab it all, right? This kind of makes sense. We'll grab Destruction in here, which is critical strike damage with core skills, which, lo and behold, that makes the most sense in the world because Ice Shards is a core skill. Next, we push across to the left, and we're going to run up top and grab vulnerable damage, as well as the damage reduction from vulnerable targets. A weird word to say 500 times. We're going to take Tactician for the vulnerable damage, as well as Intelligence, plus damage increase when you cast a defensive skill, which let's just take a real quick check. I run Sorcerer, right? Defensive skill, defensive skill, defensive skill, defensive skill. You take them all. As is every build right now with Sorcerer, but... regardless of that, it is super important you grab all those because the amount of defensive skills you're using is just free 40% damage increase, which is awesome. Chilling for the just a little bit of intelligence boost there, as well as dex on the sides. We're going to pick those up anyway. We want the dex for Tactician, and then if you push down to the bottom, weakness, the bonuses off of having Tactician max, and it's just phenomenal. All this stuff working together. We're going to push our way down. We're going to grab Guarded. More vulnerable work, which is, of course, good for survivability. And Frigid Fate. Dealing cold damage to vulnerable enemies. That's everything. Gives you up to 15% increased lucky hit chance, which, I mean, these things just start stacking on stacking on stacking, and they end up, the synergy between all these things is huge. Cold resist, a little bit more lucky hit chance. And then we push down to the last portion of the Paragon board. We're going to throw Control down here within the Searing Heat board. And set it up so we can sneak in the middle and get fire damage, but more importantly, the critical strike damage. Now, you see, I'm going to float over this just in general. The bonus, I'm barely squeaking by with 753 out of 740 intelligence. And the way that, it's funny, actually, there's a math issue here. You see 753 on the rare node, but on the left side up above me, it says 752 intelligence. Maybe a little bit of math issue in there. Blizzard, we'll get that figured out, I'm sure. No big deal. But we are barely squeaking by on both the dex and the intelligence for the bonus. If we go back to the, where was it? Not the pan, the weapon. The all stats is how we're able to pull that off. Without the all stats, we would not squeak out both those stats with the bonuses. And actually, because of that, the Paragon across the board, a lot of, not all, but a lot of these end up giving you just those last couple points for the rare nodes that give you the bonus, which is awesome. This one's not a huge one to miss out on, but some of these, it's more stun damage. Some of these, like additional non-physical, additional attack speed, additional mana, those are huge and go such a long way to increasing the effectiveness. I think that's a thing people don't keep in mind, is that your all stats kind of need to work on all of them to get the Paragon nodes, the rare ones, to get the bonuses. And that's going to increase survivability. Your damage output across the board is huge. Plus, flat int for Sorcerer is one of the damage buckets, and that's massive. So, that is the build in general. One thing I think I missed last time for enchantments, Firebolt and Ice Shards. Obviously, I think every build right now is running those. And yeah, that's generally how the skill, Paragon, and your gear is set up. On the bottom here, we'll talk about rotation super fast. Typically, you're going to keep ice armor up as often as you can. You want the barriers. You're going to do a lot of teleporting in and frost noving on elite mobs. You're going to find that a lot of stuff dies almost immediately when you do that. If it is a more difficult target, like an elite pack or a boss, you're going to throw Blizzard down first to get the chill going. You want more crowd control on targets. That is long-term effectiveness for just damage increase. You're going to be doing your frost novas as often as you can to keep vulnerability up on targets. every 6 seconds for a boss, or just as often as you have it to stun elite packs. And then your I might die right now ability, Flame Shield, you're gonna pop whenever you need it as just a guaranteed survival, survival ability. But otherwise, you're just sitting back, popping Ice Shards at everything, watching your mana stay full. You're gonna pop a cooldown as you see fit, push the mana back up because you're getting a little bit of return off the prodigies. But otherwise, it's about using your abilities at the effective times, keeping your barrier up as often as you can, just enjoying the Ice Shard spam. So, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Please hit the like button on the video and subscribe if you haven't already done so, if you're looking for an Ice Shards build. And last but not least, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. In the description down below is where you will find the link to the entire build. So if you just want to look at that, or maybe you missed it earlier in the video, whatever, you can check there. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one. Appreciate it. Use code DrLupo. Use code DrLupo. Use code